I would draw a distinction between an entity whose resources don't permit it to put money in versus an entity that just doesn't want to. And saying, I have a plan, but I'm not actually going to take any actions. My plan is not to take any actions. Right. My plan is to, there's no incentive there at all. So I guess I would just draw a distinction between ability and willingness.
Well, here's where I might disagree with you on that. Do you think the constituencies of all these employers understand the implications this is going to have on their budgets for the next 20 years? So we're talking about, we were first saying the leadership may not completely understand the 20 years, but do you think the constituencies do?
Of course not, but that's why incentives and disincentives, they are a powerful educational tool.
My point would be if City of Beaverton, as an example, now has a plan, a 20-year plan for PERS, and they understand exactly what the impact is going to be on budgets for the next 20 years, and people look at that and read it, do you think that might have some impact on the conversation about what are we going to do about this?
Nope. Because they have it now. They have it now. There's been a lot of attention paid to this issue. Yeah. I think the problem is that today's needs will always overwhelm tomorrow's needs. And all it does is increase the political pressure to, quote, do something about the problem. It does not affect current behavior unless there is a financial lever to affect current behavior.
Right.
In my view. I mean, I'm not saying there's not a lot of people who are earnestly trying to plan for the future. They absolutely are. And it's tough enough to do that looking at the, as you say, the default plan that PERS has provided, and that 20-year schedule looks mighty ugly in those out years. That's the whole issue. So if you are, it's perfectly reasonable to say, ouch, you know, it's all I can do to keep my nose above water, and I don't know how I'm going to keep my nose above water in, you know, in 20 or 30 years. Okay, if I just don't have the ability, fine. But if in fact, that's going to be somebody else's problem to deal with in 20 years or 15 years or 10 years. It's going to be a painful one, but I want to use today's resources today.
Well, along those same lines, if you don't have enough participation and it doesn't have financial impact, we still have an overall system that's at risk, and I think at a cost level that threatens, you know, the continued success of the state. This is what we're talking about. If you don't get enough participation, meaning I have a plan but I'm not putting anything in, I think the overall liability still is at a level that jeopardizes everyone, even those who are participating. And I don't know the numbers, but I would think if I'm an organization and I say I have a plan but I'm not putting anything in, if we have enough organizations that take that position, we don't have enough going in to impact the liability in the way that we want.
We don't, but then we have the fallback position, which involves larger cuts to services and, you know, pressure
that nobody
on
wants.
Constituencies.
You know, hopefully that's
so here's the way I think about it, which is maybe a little too mathematical, but as Don pointed out, the PERS board has a default plan to amortize a $25 billion gross, $20 billion net side account liability over 20 years. The idea of coming up with up to $5 billion against that is to simply pay it sooner, right? I mean, they're identical,
right,
you know, statements, right? Right? So to me, the key of every plan is that you've not only recognized how the aggregate projections of that base case apply to you. You know, in my example, that a $30 million cash contribution of OHSU will double to a $60 million cash contribution, right? Which is in our plan, by the way. But that you've said, and I'm going to not pay it at that level, but I'm going to pay it early in the following way. I'm going to make payments against that bill early, all right? And that there's some recognition that the amount you're paying is reasonable against your capacity. That's the hard part, right? And there will be some where the amount you're paying is very small,
Or potentially.
potentially de
Yeah.
minimis against that, right? Because they just don't have the money despite every honest, good faith effort, right? And for those, I would say there shouldn't be any disincentive, any penalty, if you will, right? But that has to be, to me, that has to be a real thing. In other words, there has to be some real test that you're really there,
Yeah.
rather than just saying, I looked around and no, there's nothing there, right? Because we do that a lot. I mean, right? I mean, a lot of budget processes have that characteristic, right? And it's only when you really force it that people are as creative maximally. That's how I would think about it. It's fairly harsh, I agree, but I think it's the type of thing that's going to pay this down early and mitigate the impact
But I think
globally to our state.
Can I just, Rick,
Yeah.
you have a comment you wanted to make?
Yeah. Another way to look at this may be that, because I'm concerned about the disincentive part of this. Coming at it from, for example, look, I would hate to see organizations like our kids in K through 12 have fewer school days in order to have to pay down part of this liability, right? That long-term doesn't make sense for this state. It doesn't make sense for fewer people to have health coverage in this state. It doesn't make sense for the staff and salary faculty here at Portland State to maybe get paid less when they're already paid 10, 20% more compared to their peer group, because Portland State receives one of the lowest levels of support from the state of all the public institutions. There are just some institutions that are so vital and don't have the ability to really have a meaningful impact on paying down this liability without help. And I would hate to see those kind of organizations, necessary services, and impact on our future generation through a disincentive plan. So maybe another way to look at this is to set a benchmark that you'd want to achieve with public employers through an incentive plan. And if you can't achieve that benchmark after really trying hard, then maybe revert to a disincentive plan that's already laid out. And maybe through, you know what I'm saying? You don't have to, I'm really worried about this disincentive. When you talk about 900 different public employers, it's going to be hard to justify quantitatively figuring out all 900 who's doing enough. That's hard to quantify.
Completely.
And so I'm just again, I'm just kind of warning us not to go too far on the disincentive.
But do you feel that, no, I take your point, but all we're asking people to do is build a plan and work on the problem.
Right.
And I want to just clarify one other thing here too, which is when you guys talk about a plan that you have, you don't just have a plan around PERS.
Oh, no.
Your plan is the enterprise.
It's a $3 billion budget, yes.
The point here, though, is if you're a small employer, I'm going to guess they don't have 10-year plans, okay?
You could be a large employer.
There you go. So the point I'm getting at with this is I do wonder if people really understand this, okay? There's a lot of stuff. To me, it feels like global warming, okay? People know it's nasty. There's a lot of short-term pain for some gain that comes off, 50 years from now. And I think there's a hard time coming to grips with what this really is about. And what we're really asking people to do is engage. That's all we're asking them to do. It would be great if we had some sort of did you work hard enough test. I'm not sure how to do that. So all we're proposing here is that we ask people, build a plan. Show yourselves and your constituents what's going to happen over the next 10 to 20 years and how you're going to deal with it, and then deal with it as best you can. If you can't, all right, you got the default plan. You're going to have to deal with it over 20 years. If you do, take those steps.